Good morning, everyone. People are joining. So just 2 secs as we let people in, and we will get started very shortly. Thank you for your patience. Excellent. As people are still coming in, I'll get started. So my name is Anthony Suarez. I am the director of the Center for Cross-Border Studies, and I'm delighted to have you all here with us today for this seminar on progressing globally ambitious sectoral clusters on the island of Ireland, where we will be having a presentation of a report by Neil O'Donnell and a session then chaired by Professor Eleanor Doyle, with a panel then involving Shane Murphy, Declan Hughes and Alison Curry, who I'm sure all of you already know. But it's an absolute delight for me to host you here today and to welcome you to this seminar today. As I said, my name is Anthony Suarez. I'm the director of the Center for Cross-Border Studies, and I have a pleasure of making an announcement. It's to announce the fact that Neil has graciously accepted to become a senior research associate with the Center for Cross-Border Studies. So I'm delighted that he's accepted to take on that particular role. Absolutely delighted. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Professor Eleanor Doyle of University College Cork from the Cork College Business School, who will chair the rest of this session. But before I do, could I just ask everyone, if you have any questions about the presentation or any questions you want to pose to the panel, please do so through the Q&A function. So you'll see the button towards the bottom of your screen. Just type in any questions, comments as well. If you want, please do that. And you can also use the chat function. But if you'd like to use the chat function, can you do that if you want to share information between each other? That will be absolutely fantastic. But in terms of questions to the panel, questions to the author of the report, please put that into the sorry, I've just seen there the first question coming in. Should we refer to Neil now as Professor? Yeah, please Q&A for questions, chat for exchanging information between yourselves. That would be fantastic. So I'm absolutely delighted now to hand over to Professor Eleanor Doyle, who will chair the rest of this session. Thank you. Over to you, Eleanor.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for the invitation to be here. Delighted to and looking forward to hearing what Neil is going to present us with. Clustering has been close to my heart now for many, many years. And I think those of us with an interest in economic development are probably a bit impatient to see what's happening in the clustering space. We've had promises in this direction for quite some time. So it's interesting now to get the reflection of someone with Neil's experience in this area. So Neil, before this morning, I was going to introduce you as an independent strategy advisor. Following your elevation, I guess you have, in any case, a number of strings to your bow. So congratulations on this appointment. The Centre for Cross-Border Studies is doing some interesting work and has been now for some time. So it'd be interesting, perhaps you'll tell us what that fit will be for you moving forward. So we're going to proceed this morning once Neil takes us through his report. It's a substantial piece of work, Neil. So I guess you'd only be able to give us, high-level pointers by way of summary this morning. But hopefully that will whet our appetite in terms of the questions and the issues that we will be able to discuss with our panel. So I'm delighted that we will have Declan Hughes, Secretary General at the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, on the panel later, along with Shane Murphy, who is Deputy Secretary General at the Department for Economy. And we also have Alison Curry from Intertrade Ireland, where Alison is the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So we will have different perspectives in terms of, I guess, north, south, cross-border, and it'll be interesting to see what connections we make on the basis of Neil, what you're going to introduce us to. Lots of nerdy questions I have now, Neil, that I'll probably have to follow up with you after today, but there really is a lot of detail in what you've put together. And I like that you even approach how you've gone about the work by way of calling it a reflection, because there has been so much work in this space now for quite some time. And as I say, the timing seems very interesting in terms of clustering, its involvement at different levels of policy, Northern Ireland, and also in terms of the various policy documents that are joining up dots south of the border as well. So for me, delighted to hear what Neil has to tell us. I will go on mute, and I'm very happy to hand over now, Neil, for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor, and thank you everybody for joining us here this morning. And thank you, Anthony. Honoured to be part of the Centre's important work. And Eleanor, thank you for chairing our workshop. We've been a Centre thinker in terms of clustering over a number of decades at this stage, and it's a really great to have you here to actually chair our reflection and discussions here today. And it is what I'm going to share with the webinar, the workshop, is actually a personal reflection. So this is my perspective. There are, I'm sure, many different views and perspectives as well, and that's the point that can be shared and brought into the discussion. So this reflection is looking at sector clustering. Clustering is seen by many as a major driver of economic development. And what the reflection does is look at what sector clustering means and how it can be progressed in the regions and jurisdictions across the island of Ireland. And when we look at the reflection on clustering, it looks at the smart specialization strategies that have been developed by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment in the S3 for Innovation strategy, and by the Department for the Economy, the 10X Economy strategy, and working through those smart specialization strategies and looking at them through the lens of the European panorama of clusters and industrial change. And the sectoral priorities coming from those respective smart specialization strategies, if you like, are the starting point, and the reflection builds on these priority sectors and reflects on how they can be further progressed as an input into the discussion. So when we look at clusters and define, what the question is, what do we mean by sectoral clusters and clustering? And there are a variety of meanings and a constant debate as to what we actually mean by sectoral clustering. What I see as sectoral clustering actually really is there are three broad definitions, themes, meanings of sectoral clustering. The first is statistical concentration, higher percentage of companies in a particular region or spatial area, with little or no connections between individual companies other than maybe as buyers and sellers, and with little or no stakeholders policy focus. It's primarily a statistical agglomeration, concentration, if you like. Then there is the conglomeration sense of sectors, where a grouping of individual companies, still with a few close connections between each other, but now have a policy focus and are serviced by sector-specific bodies in education and training, in research, standards, etc. And these companies can come together to represent their collective requests, if you like, of the stakeholders, the environment, the business, and shape the business environment. And finally, then the third theme or definition would be around collaborative clustering or collaboration, where a subset of such companies actually closely interact as businesses and share some business functions, marketing, purchasing, training, and so on. And such clustering may be informal or formal, and have some kind of sector clustering body that could be funded by Enterprise Ireland or INI or Intertrade or whoever. And then when we look at the European panorama of clusters and industrial change, their approach is very much in the first category, if you like, of clustering. They're looking at it as a statistical concentration of companies, the first level of meaning that we've just talked about. And what they do is they take 5 measures and they basically assess throughout Europe the performance or the existence and then performance of these of clusters, and they categorize them as high, medium, and low cluster performance, depending on the intensity of the 5 measures that we're looking at here. And what they do then is that they're taking those clusters and the high, medium, and basic, as they call it, performing clusters, they associate that with productivity. And as we can see here, the higher the clustering, the greater the productivity that is associated. And of course, this is why we're all so interested in clustering as a key driver of economic development. So what the reflection has done is, first of all, look and mapped, if you like, and analyze where sector clustering is occurring. There's a qualitative, judgmental gap analysis of aspirations and potential versus capability investments, and has already been remarked as a highly personal reflection and judgment, and then focuses on how clusters can progress to the next level of performance within the region and then jurisdictions and across the island. So what we're looking at here is the results, if you like, of the European panorama analysis of clusters within on the island of Ireland. Just go back one if we could. Okay. So and what we're seeing here is, first of all, this is adapted from their work. I've had to do a bit of breaking out of the southern region based on the panorama. Actually looked at it pre-2014 when there was only 2 regions within the Republic of Ireland. So what they are showing us, though, is that basically in their analysis, Eastern Midlands has got most of the clusters, 18. Northern Ireland has got 11 of the clusters. Southern region is computed as having 8, and then Northern Western region has at most 4. So what the reflection does then is dives into each of the sectors in each of the regions and looks at them at a granular level, if you like. So taking medical devices in the Northern Western region, it's high in terms of its presence within particularly around Galway City and up the West Coast. It's a priority from a policy point of view in terms of smart specialization strategy, and has an emerging a sector, digital or e-health sector. It's got strong capability in terms of University of Galway, Atlantic Technology University, and DK Institute of Technology. And it has, the question then becomes, how can this sector in this region go up a level? And again, medtech in Northern Western region around Galway City, in particular around the West Coast, is seen, and rightly so, as one of our strongest clusters on the island. And here still we can ask, okay, can we go up to the next level, whatever that may be? And for example, perhaps more investment in interdisciplinary academic expertise and ranking, and also obviously making a major progression, if you want, in e-health, digital health as a basis for progression within that cluster. And of course, linking that further with the medtech clusters in Germany and in Boston. So that's, if you like, the kind of approach taken at individual sectoral and regional level. And then we bring it together for the region in terms of their priority sectors. So what we're seeing, we start with what the European panorama has talked about in terms of 4 clusters for the Northern Western region. And then in 2 steps, go to a suggested priority sectors for the next 7 years within this region. So 2 steps will be, first, to mechanically, as it were, promote. So biopharmas, for example, biopharmaceuticals here is at low according to the panorama, and we say, okay, we'll go up to the next level of medium. But then we have to make a judgment about, okay, so what have we actually got in the region? Obviously, medical devices, strong and one of the high performing sectors to go even higher. Production technology engineering has got a segment which is seen by the panorama as strong, but actually engineering overall doesn't feature in the panorama's rating of cluster. But we know from a qualitative assessment of what's happening in the region that engineering is strong within the region, and particularly in the Northwest. And so for that reason, we put it as a sector that we can progress further on in terms of the next 7 years. And digital business services, again, is presence within the region and important from a job creation point of view. And so on in the other sectors within this particular region and also for the other regions. And that gives us, if you like, a sectoral development portfolio for this region, where using the MIT local innovation system approach for existing industries, it's about transforming and building on what we have and going up a level within the existing sectors. In some cases, there may be some conversion into adjacent sectors required to strengthen the sector. And for emerging industries, it's a matter of either creation in terms, particularly building on the research, for example, in software development that's already in the universities in the region, and new startups, high potential startups in Ireland and so forth, and then or transplanting. So if we want to do more in offshore wind, which we obviously do in this particular region, it has to be done by bringing in big companies who have deep expertise and pockets in that particular sector. And then going at a granular level, looking at each sector within each region in terms of what we have in terms of companies, what's the SWOT, if you like, in terms of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then what are the 2 or 3 things that will bring us up a level in this sector, in this region, over the next 7 years. And then bringing it all together with the 4 NUTS 2 regions, the 2 jurisdictions, we have the various sectors and agendas, if you like, suggested agendas in terms of sectoral priorities within the next for the medium term. And then the question is, can we bring that together in terms of medium term sectoral priorities on the island of Ireland, in terms of how can the whole become greater than the sum of its parts? How can we leverage scale and synergies on the island in terms of some key sectors? And when we look at these sectors, the reflection examines, are these sectors present in all the regions? Are they high, medium, or low performing? What does the judgment about what's present in terms of investment in higher education and so on? And so, as a result, these are qualitative suggested priorities in terms of the sector's priorities across the island of Ireland, with life sciences, software, and production engineering as the top 3, and then the others. But from if we're talking about globally ambitious sectoral clusters and going up a level, the key has to be that it's an outside-in perspective that we're taking. It's not much benefit us on the island or within the sectors and regions and jurisdictions are saying, well, we're very globally competitive and have a strong presence globally and so forth. What really matters, of course, is what people globally think, what the end users in particular have as a perspective on what's available here and present on the island. And so what's suggested here is that's an importance in having a narrative within each of the key sectors in terms of our global reputation that we're trying to foster and encourage. And so, for example, in agri-food, grassland production has been a core part of the narrative. And obviously the recent announcement this week of an all-island Irish grass-fed beef as a protected geographic indication is actually key part of that, and a signal that actually is a central bit of what the reputation of agri-food on the island should be. If you go to life sciences, excellent production of compounds, devices, and diagnostics across the regions, being been recognized and understood as being also embedded in digital health systems focused on personalized medicines. But that is, if you like, the reputation that we want to further strengthen and build internationally and globally and become well known for. If we look at financial services, again, the opportunity exists to, as it's already happening in various parts of the island and regions and jurisdictions, is applying digital to finance. So for cybersecurity, regulatory compliance, efficiencies within the banks and other financial institutions, access in terms of customers being to get different ways of accessing finance, and of course, new models of financing. And then again, this is digitalized finance, if you like, is the heart of the global reputation for what we already have on the island, and bringing that together in terms of narrative. And of course, in hospitality, we already have narrative through Tourism Ireland, with the 2 jurisdictions and the 5 brands that are actually on the island. So this is kind of important in terms of, if we are globally ambitious, we have to look outside in terms of what's our global reputation and the global narrative about the key sectors that we're focused on as priorities. And then obviously over the other part of this is actually reaching out, connections and synergies, both existing and potential, between the 4 regions, 2 jurisdictions on the island, and then reaching out to global centres of expertise, Great Britain, UK, the wider Europe, US and Asia. And underpinning that throughout all the sectors, there's a kind of a common platform, and to be globally recognized as having a common platform that is user-driven, developing innovative, digitalized, sustainable products and services that are connected and embedded within human-centric, intelligent, data-rich, adaptive learning systems. That's an important bit of, if you like, as a core platform that has actually been strengthened and developed on the island. Why is this important? Well, it's important because if somebody moves from one sector to another, she can bring he or she can bring her expertise in terms of the basic, and understand the basic issues as common to each of these industries, and basically adapt and use that expertise in different ways that moves it forward. So what we're talking about here is a common platform language that allows a perspective which allows us to speed up transfer of expertise, speed up innovation, and become a much more innovative island overall. So how to make this happen, how to progress, is about working together to develop shared visions, pathways, and structures. And if we look at the plan level here, if you like, where it's about the sector and diamond helix in regions and jurisdictions, we're basically talking about what is quite common at this stage, where we have a particular focus on a sector in a region and jurisdiction, and trying to build up that sector with further investment and connections and so forth. And then if we go down a level, we're talking about the formal collaborative clusters, the groupings that are often localized and specialized, funded by Enterprise Ireland, Invest Northern Ireland, Intertrade, and so on. And then if we go up a level, then we're talking at a framework, we're looking at a framework that's all island, and that's looking at the global trends, internal capabilities, strengths, and opportunities, stressed that we have here, and the strategic direction, and then joint projects and networks that would help us leverage scale and synergies for this sector across the island, and through the means, if you like, of some form of sectoral forum. And joint projects, then this illustrates the kind of joint projects by various sectors that are suggested as being priority sectors in different ways. We already have other existing projects that are already the North-South Research Programme, for example, the recent announcement of the co-centres with global food security, which is all ISLES, as in both all island, across the island here, and also including Great Britain, UK, and that's just been announced. And as an example, And here we have the North-South Research Programme for higher education, intriguingly and interestingly enough, very strong in terms of health and life sciences. And so we look now at, from a global perspective, what are we looking at here? We're looking at the top UK European life sciences clusters as an example, and we're looking here at a strong hub in Cambridge, going up another level with the Cambridge Innovate initiative. It's got Southwest Germany, very strong hub also, with deep expertise and capability in these, Munich, Freiburg, Stuttgart, and then of course Boston as another global hub. These are the core hubs, if you like, of life sciences or at a global level. And the question, of course, is how can on the island, across the island, we become part of that? The first, of course, is to get the island of Ireland onto the actual, go back a bit, onto the top, get the island of Ireland onto the map in the first place, and as particularly as a critical spoke to the three hubs we've just talked about. That, if you like, could be the aim over the next 7 years in terms of an all-island strengthening of what's happening in each region, each jurisdiction, and leveraging the scale and synergies across the island for the life sciences sector to make it a critical spoke to Cambridge, Southwest Germany, and Boston. So finally, then, in terms of recommendations or suggestions, obviously, continued discussion and of the approach towards across the island sectoral development at regional, jurisdiction, and all island levels. And this reflection, if you like, is an input into that discussion. Specifying the kind of goals then up to over the medium term to 2030 at regional and jurisdiction levels in terms of sectors as priorities, building on the existing smart specialization work, and then looking at an all-island level in terms of the sectoral priorities and the goals that we would have for them. Then getting to the specifics around how could that be done. It's around planning frameworks and forums, as we talked about already, and joint projects that could move the agenda forward. And obviously, in part of that, there's collaborative clustering and co-creation of collaborative clustering policy led by the two departments involving Intertrade, of course, and its synergy program and so on, Enterprise Ireland, Invest Northern Ireland, and others with deep and useful experience here. And of course, building on the work that's already been done in terms of actually mapping the sectoral clusters on the island of Ireland as a follow-up to the pioneering work in the 2015 mapping study. And then looking at that in terms of in each region and jurisdiction at a granular level, looking at the specific needs of each sector in each region and building it up to or in the medium term so that the foundation, if you like, is becoming stronger and helps us be able to leverage that as scale and synergies. The specific actions then, of course, in technology and cluster linkages and higher education, further education, public sector investment, looking at how process sectoral development, individual enterprise development to interact, already strong within the operational agencies, but again, how can we progress that? And of course, participating in international forums or various forums on clustering to understand more about it. And finally, to consider putting in place an all-island observatory for sectoral and company dynamics and development so that we get a more deeper dive, more in-depth understanding of the dynamics at cluster, sectoral level and individual company level so that we have a much more deeper understanding of the production platform from which all else comes in terms of surpluses that fund other things and all the other benefits of a productive economy, both economic and social. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to panel discussion and the any questions and answers from the audience. Thank you so much.
That's great, Neil. Thanks so much for that. lots of information shared now. And as I say, it's from the richness of the longer document. There's a lot of unpacking to be done to go through the work. So many thanks for that. So we may move to our panel session right now. Have we, I can see Shane, yes. Shane Murphy, Deputy Sec Gen for Department for Economy. You're very welcome. Many thanks for taking your time this morning to be with us. Similarly, Alison from Intertrade Ireland. Alison is the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Great to have you here this morning as well. Do we have Declan? I can't see his... I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Anthony.
Typing that right now. He's
perfect. Ah, I see him. Good to have you. That's great. Thanks so much, Declan, for being here. I introduced you already, Declan. You're Secretary General at the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. Would you mind if I started with you, Declan, then maybe?
Sure, yeah.
Just you're in the hot seat.
And thanks, Neil, for all the work on this. Fantastic to have that compilation, and that also that you've rooted in, I suppose, in smart specialization strategy and all the work that's been done north and south, but also drawing on all of the work, including by Professor Doyle and others over many years. And indeed, it was just, I know it's referenced in the book, but indeed in Neil's paper, and or your own contribution to a compendium we did in Forfos about 15, 16 years ago on clustering, and indeed some of the lessons or some of the recommendations at that stage. So hopefully we're making some progress on some of the areas that you had identified. And congratulations to Neil also on his new appointment in the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. That's fantastic. And thanks, Anthony, and the Cross-Border Studies indeed for focus on this. What we do need, and that's something I'll come back to a little bit later, is around those processes and those engagements and that institutional strength in terms of at all levels, that we do have, whether it's development agencies or policy think tanks or others, that we have that ongoing dialogue, because again, a point that Neil makes later on in terms of the importance of adaptive learning. I think, and as I said, it's really important that we see this in the context of a continued evolution of research and of policy work and of funding programs in this space. And I'd probably use, and I thought Neil presented it very well in terms of just if we thinking about it from the point of view of our performance, our potential, and then what processes we need underneath to ensure that we are achieving the full potential for productivity growth that clusters can enable or can generate. But particularly, I suppose my other point would be at a high level is that we also now begin to look at it very much, which we are doing through smart specialization, through an innovation ecosystem lens, in terms of bringing all those elements together, in terms of which go to ensuring that our innovation ecosystem is performing and is among the best in the world, essentially, in the areas that we focus on. We can't be good at everything, but there certainly are areas, as we have been trying over the last 2 decades, really, to ensure that we do embed technology and innovation and science and research and business models, etc., at the heart of our enterprise and industrial development strategy. So I think, first of all, strong focus on productivity at the heart of the clusters and what we can seek to achieve and what the policy objectives should be. I thought Neil in the reflections really reflected very well in terms of across that methodology in terms of high, medium, and low performing sectors. Really good, really helpful, but particularly, I suppose, just across the all island dimension. In terms of where we have an interesting there's a lot of complementarities in our high performing clusters in life sciences and medical devices. And we know over many years that has been, those linkages have been very deep from an innovation perspective. So in some cases, I can think in the medical devices area where we've strength in manufacturing, but actually really strong and strengths in research in, for example, Queen's, etc. as well, which is of interest. And there were strong links there. And as with colleagues in the Department of Business and Trade on Wednesday, and we were discussing these issues in terms of sectoral priorities for Ireland and UK going forward. And one point I was making, which I think is really significant, is that now that the UK is back as part of Horizon Europe in the EU, that does give us those mechanisms or those channels for strengthening that collaboration in terms of on the technology and the research side. So certainly very much welcome that. I thought Neil emphasised that brought out the points in relation to engineering extremely well, and the engineering and how that's focusing into mobility, etc. as well, and the opportunities there. But I also thought, in terms of just reflecting on it, in terms of the low performing sectors, from a productivity and a cluster development perspective, there are also ones where we probably do need to really have a deep dive in terms of what more could we do in those areas. I'm thinking particularly around construction and construction products and services. That's something really important from a societal perspective and from an all-island development perspective. So we've been doing a lot of work in the department and across government on modern methods of construction, and Neil refers to that in the paper around modular build, etc. But that's a very significant restructuring of our construction industry in terms of with off-site manufacturing, use of business information modeling, etc. And we can see that the top tier of companies are engaged and are actually networking extremely well, but they account for maybe 20–30% of output, whereas it's actually right across the base where you have a very fragmented industry, and that we do need those tens of thousands of sole traders, subcontracting industry. There's a restructuring needed of that, which would, in order to ensure that we achieve what we've seen in modern methods and in terms of the UK evidence and from others, is productivity improvements of 20–30% in terms of the timelines, in terms of cost savings, but also circular economy and sustainability to adapting new methods. And that comes back to the point that I suppose that Neil makes later on in terms of having those platforms or maybe disruptive technologies where you've got something that we're getting from strategic intelligence and we're gathering in terms of information, but how do you then work with industry and facilitate and activate that engagement? And for example, in that case, we've funded a new centre for in modern methods of construction in Galway. It's a competitive process, but it's a collaboration across all the universities with industry links out to the industry as members. We're putting 5 million into that, and that's been a really quick start initiative over the last 12 to 18 months. So I think the high productivity and the medium raising their game are high performing sectors as we map them. But I make that point in terms of there are low performing sectors where there's significant potential for an uplift that we could look at. So I think that comes back to the why. When we're selling this to industry, we have to be clear to them what the benefits are in terms of and that they raise the perspective in terms of raise their view in terms of the horizon, in terms of the new technologies, new business models, and what the benefit to them is in terms of particularly when we think now about digitalization and decarbonisation. So look, they're just some reflections on performance and maybe potential, but I might just turn to just the process as well. And this is something which we've probably, if we think back 15–20 years ago, and even back to Culleton and previous times, in terms of what's the process for activating and developing self-sustaining clusters. And that's been a real challenge, and indeed, Emily, you would have reflected on that in your own piece at the time. And I suppose what we started probably in 2017, 2018 was deliberately funding and putting out calls for clusters and cluster development. And some of the first initiatives were under the Regional Enterprise Development Fund, and we put out funding which would be available for leaders to come forward to develop either bottom up. In some cases, they were seeded and they were developed by the development agencies in terms of working with various clusters, and we put out funding initiatives, a couple of $100,000 to pay for the management, pay for consultancy, etc. And they've had good success. I can think of a few in terms of Emerald Aerospace Cluster established in the aerospace manufacturing sector in the Midwest, and Limerick Data Value Hub in Monaghan. Again, that was border enterprise funding, and it was a cluster in agri-food and engineering sectors. IT at Cork, Kerry SciTech. Again, bringing together all of those initiatives, and we've learned from that now as we have developed our smart specialization strategy and thinking about how do we take that forward. So smart specialization strategy, as Neil has given us a comprehensive view of that, but we have secured additional 120 million as part of the European Regional Development Fund, and we will be specifically focusing on clusters and cluster development as part of that strategy, and that also dovetails with the focus now on the enterprise white paper. But just maybe to give a perspective on the enabling measure around that, as part of the smart specialization strategy, we've now gone out with Enterprise Ireland through trying to develop innovation clusters, and they have developed their technology gateway program, but actually trying to cluster them together. And 3 areas I'd highlight in particular was applied Internet of Things, which brought together a number of 5 gateways, which will work with industry. And I'd say them as not the only solution, but part of the institutional structure to work with industry and to bring industry in and to bring industry players, whether at regional level or at national level, because in some cases, whether it's in engineering, there's a concentration at a regional level, but there will be areas of interest nationally. So the engineering materials and design cluster has 7 gateways, which are again, from an innovation perspective, are leading on trying to crowd in and engage with industry. And in some of those areas, I mean, we're seeing very significant numbers, and we have targets for those in terms of engagement. So on the Irish Food Tech is another one which I would mention, which has 7 technology clusters which are involved. And those 3 combined have about 300 researchers and engineering professionals, and they've done 4,000 innovation projects with 2,500 Irish companies. So that's a quick start. And then finally, just to mention, we have gone out with a new call now, which is a successor for the Regional Enterprise Development Fund. And as part of that, which is our new 145 million Smart Regions Enterprise Innovation Scheme. And as part of that, we will have a stream specifically for supporting cluster managers, cluster development, so as that we can bring forward proposals. And again, there'll be funding, the 2 million available to support those initiatives. Based on the business cases, I think that Neil has referred to, and the collaboration that Neil has referred to, we'd very much love to see those also having cross-border dimensions. I think there's potential as part of the Shared Island Fund as well, and I think that's something of very much of interest to our Minister Coveney, and to the department as well. And again, that's an area where, as Neil refers to, that Intertrade Ireland can play, and collaboration with the enterprise development agencies, North and South, and the 2 departments. We have a key role to play in activating, enabling, and supporting those developments. So that's a whistle stop of some comments, but look, I think that's really useful, very helpful, lots of very important insights as we reflect on the next stages of cluster development for productivity growth and for supporting innovation and driving and supporting innovation or prosperity on the island. As Neil said, that we are regarded as a leader, not just in 1 or 2 areas in terms of clusters, but across a broader range that are really important to us. So I'll pause there, Eleanor. Thank you.
That's super. Thanks very much, Declan. And it's funny, I had a number of thoughts in relation to, you know, how policy has progressed, how implementation has progressed, and you've covered all of that now in your whistle stop tour there. So that's really insightful. I guess we'll be back to you for Q&A. I'll have a look at the questions that are coming in due course. It does strike me, and it's one of the kind of issues I had written in the margin myself as I was going through the report, and it has to do with maybe it's time of year now, but clustering as a kind of a Santa Claus that can deliver everything. I think in terms of, and I guess I'm coming from having worked this week for 2 days with cluster managers on a training program. So I've met a lot of the people who are delivering, who have managed to get funding, whether it's through Synergy, whether it's through RTCF, whether they're, you know, REDF funding, different types of funds, and challenges around implementation and having clarity on where we're going with our different policies. And I'm coming from a context where we know the promises of clustering are in areas such as, well, obviously you need to develop trust and initial collaboration. That's really important. There are great strengths that can be delivered around skills and companies working together to push forward the skills requirements, and to work with the local providers and so on. But where the biggest gaps seem to be locally is on, I guess, the added value or the more complex type of deliverables from clustering, which would be through internationalization and through innovation. And I think more clarity, and actually one of your colleagues, Siobhan O'Carroll from DETI, was advising us that in terms of the next phases of the clustering policy, what we would probably see is a more clear layering of different approaches that are very clearly appropriate for different types of clusters at different levels of development. So I think that all aligns with the information coming from Neil's report and from your commentary there. But I would like to bring Shane into the conversation, please. And I imagine, Shane, you can fill us in terms of, I guess, the current fit of clustering within what's happening in the northern space. I think there is the same sort of movement evident in terms of policy development, the 10X, and the evidence that has been collected in relation to that. I also am prompted to mention that clustering obviously is about competitiveness of business and productivity and all those good things, but it also has a very clear place-based emphasis that is focusing on not just the economy, but the society and if you like, broader quality of life types of issues that, you know, makes clustering quite interesting, I guess, from a research and policy perspective, by bringing those things together. So perhaps I might ask you then, Shane, if you could give us an insight in terms of the implications of the report in terms of what you're doing in your role.
Okay, thanks, Eleanor, and thanks to Anthony, Niall, and Co for putting this on, and for, you know, their inviting us along and attracting such a substantial audience. There are quite a few takeaways from this, and some of those takeaways are quite comforting on the journey we've taken to date, and some are more challenging for the road we've yet to travel. And in some ways, the comforting bits have probably surprised a little. We have a technologies and clusters agenda intertwined with the 10X agenda. As Declan talked about earlier, we can't be good at everything, and so let's not try. And we've got years of showing that trying to be good at everything doesn't work. So we've pretty successfully moved the agenda to more comfortably talk and more openly talk about focusing on a subset of areas, having, you know, lining up those areas of you know, innovative, inventive capability with industrial capability and with potential scale impact, which typically means international markets. Aligning those up and looking at where the best sort of policy bets to make. So that's, you know, that's been a different sort of take than policy in the past for us. In terms of that, you know, that leads to questions, and he's touched on the presentation about industry, and in this industry having a voice and umbrellas, bodies, and so forth, and how well all of that is linked into the innovation agenda, and do the relevant innovation ecosystem talk to the industry and so forth, and those challenges been strong. And I think, you know, that's part of our agenda to understand whether that's always the case, whether those challenges need to be built or strengthened, or, you know, their umbrellas properly cover the industry and the sector and the cluster and so forth. And that's been on our agenda, albeit to date we haven't necessarily been thinking so much about the clustering aspects, because on this journey we've had a focus on the technology work, the sort of USPs of Northern Ireland. That was kind of year one policy making, and that all broke cover in a consultation a couple of months back. That was all really useful, because of year of the Good Friday Agreement, an awful lot of international focus arrived in Northern Ireland, and we didn't want to waste that for economic perspective. And that's really pushed us hard to, and this was again touched on the presentation about, you know, there, what are we known for and what's our narrative in those areas internationally. And that's really pushed us hard this year to do that. But, you know, we're really glad of the opportunity and probably also some of the success in doing that. And that's really helped clarify our thinking. We're doing a lot of policy work this year on the linkages and making the most of that innovative agenda and the links into industry for impacts at scale. But as we look at the the presentation and the paper, and also looking at we're in the business of absorbing as much information on pointers and clusters at the minute, because we're going to more formally bring that into the policy agenda from next year onwards. Next year for us being April onwards, financial years. And there's probably a couple of things that jump out at me in what Niall said. Maps always work really well for getting points across. And when you're not on the map, that sort of leads you to conclude, what does it take to get us on the map? And scale is a common problem that we have, and certainly in Northern Ireland, it's probably even a little bit bigger of a problem. And scale, in many cases, cannot be gained on your own. And so, I think for us, we'll have to think whether having two separate clusters means none of us on the map, and if we could work to somehow bring that together. And bear in mind, the island of Ireland is not a big place, and maybe there we perceive distance there to be there greater than perhaps someone in Europe or the US would perceive that distance. But I think the scope we'd be up for looking at whether if we can somehow link clusters, does that put us on the map? And Declan mentioned things like shared island and so forth, and those all would be useful conversations to have. So those are a couple of reflections. Say we're in the market for for influencing on pointers and all the information we can get on clustering as we take forward the policy. But say those are a couple of factors which probably landed with me, and it's the point to scale and whether working together can help us overcome that and put us on the map.
Thanks, Shane. And would it be fair to say that clustering from a policy direction is part and parcel of where policy is heading right now?
Absolutely. But we're very open-minded. So I'm not here sitting with a fixed view as to, and as Niall hinted, clustering is an area where there's not a universal single view on some of this stuff. But we're not sitting here with fixed views on this. So research like this is can be very influential in shaping our thinking. The more of it we absorb, we will use that in as we start to sort of layer clusters onto the sort of kind of the technologies agenda and the sectoral agenda, which is their sort of foundations are being put in place on that. But say we're very open-minded to how we layer that clustering aspect onto that. So open for business, for clustering policy and ideas.
Super. Thanks so much, Shane. I might turn now to Alison. You're welcome, Alison. Great to have you here. You're operating in a different space, I guess. You're with Intertrade Ireland. Maybe you might tell us maybe a quick background to ITI for anyone who's not that familiar, but then perhaps how you're working and contributing to the clustering space. Now, I would kind of preface that by saying I think a lot of your work would be around networks rather than clusters, and we're not too hung up on labels or anything like that. So if you can perhaps introduce us to ITI, what you do, and the role of networking and clustering supports. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Eleanor, and thanks, Neil, for the presentation, and Declan and Shane. Really interesting points and lots of good reflections to take on board. To give I suppose a very brief overview of Intertrade Ireland, we are the all-island trade and business development body. We are funded by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment in Ireland and the Department for Economy in Northern Ireland. And really, we have a unique role to deliver common economic policy priorities and act as a connector north and south to all stakeholders, whether that is policymakers, businesses, business representative groups, clusters, or networks. And I suppose what we do really is try to create those all-island connections to accelerate business growth and economic prosperity. And we do that aligned very much to the policy drivers north and south, and through our own corporate strategic priorities. And we have 3 big corporate strategic priorities. We want to grow cross-border exports on the island, north-south, south-north. We want to enable collaborative innovation, so supporting companies to remove barriers to growth and to accelerate their business development by collaborating on a north-south basis. And we then deliver work to support clusters and networks to collaborate. And as you alluded to, I use the word clusters and networks there because the cluster ecosystem is perhaps more developed in Ireland than it is in Northern Ireland at the moment. But there are networks that have the potential or the opportunity or ambition to develop and grow and to become clusters. And I suppose if I go back a little bit as to kind of why we got involved in those networks and clusters, and I think, Neil, you referenced the 2015 mapping study. It was a piece of research that Intertrade Ireland commissioned, really to map the island, to identify the priority sectors, which led us then to think about mechanisms as to how we could support those priority sectors. And that aligned at the time with kind of policy moving in that direction. So that very long-windedly or shortly led to the development of the Synergy initiative, which we deliver now. And that really aims to scale that cross-border collaboration using clusters and networks, and particularly to increase SME participation in clusters and networks. And we kind of support those clusters and networks in different ways. Primarily, we support those clusters in Ireland to connect with the clusters and networks in Northern Ireland, really where there is a common opportunity or a challenge that those clusters or networks could address. And we fund them there to deliver projects. And there are lots of examples. So I'll give one really brief one and can talk to others. A really successful one recently was where we worked with Cyber Ireland and Northern Ireland Cyber, who also work with the advanced manufacturing clusters and the mega network in Northern Ireland to support advanced manufacturing SMEs on the island to become more prepared for kind of cyber security. So that matched companies north and south in the advanced manufacturing and cyber sectors. It helped to upskill those advanced manufacturing companies in terms of how they needed to be prepared for potential cyber attacks. It helped upskill those cyber solutions providers in terms of how they can provide products and services to SMEs on the island. So lots of knowledge and upskilling, but also direct business done between then the participating members of those clusters and groups. In terms of Synergy, we also work with, and there are some all-island clusters in terms of the FinTech Corridor and the All-Island Irish Bioeconomy Foundation. Again, very much to increase SME participation, to look at skills within the sectors and to drive innovation, productivity and growth there. Synergy also will fund research, and typically that's research to look at the potential of new cross-border or all-island clusters. And interestingly, kind of linking back to the report and some of the comments, life and health sciences is a really relevant one. We've currently got a project with Queen's University Belfast and UCD who are undertaking a research project to look at the potential for an all-island or cross-border cluster in precision oncology. So they're building on those strong academic links across the island, looking at the opportunities associated with lots of work done from the All-Island Cancer Consortium, and then looking at how SMEs can really take those opportunities to develop and build and grow into that network or cluster and put Ireland, north and south, on the map as a kind of specialist in that particular area within life and health sciences. And then the final area that Synergy works with, and you mentioned it there, Eleanor, you were involved in terms of delivering cluster management training and skills. We know that one of the big challenges for clusters is becoming sustainable in terms of a financially sustainable business model. And we know that that takes a long time. So we're supporting those cluster managers, north and south, and policymakers and kind of economic development agencies. We're all involved in that, to look at how we can help clusters progress to those sustainable finance models, look at how clusters can build a program of activity that is really relevant and important for their members in terms of innovation, internationalization, best practice, And then also, I think you touched on this, what's really important for those clusters and networks is to be able to demonstrate their value back to funders and to their members, so that kind of becomes that ongoing sustainability cycle. And we know why demonstrating that value is really important. We know, Neil, you touched on some of the EU research. You know, SMEs involved in clusters are just more productive, they grow more quickly, they export more across more borders, they attract higher skills, they're able to pay higher wages. So all of those really positive factors need to be captured by each of those Irish and Northern Irish networks and clusters, so that we're measuring the impact and kind of promoting the opportunity to become involved in clusters. So that's a bit of a, I suppose, a whistle-stop tour of the Synergy initiative. And if I could just draw a couple of other points, we did at Intertrade Ireland a piece of research that was published back in 2022 around kind of clustering on the island of Ireland and a gap analysis. And I think there's been some points that I kind of touched on here. In terms of some of the gaps identified, cluster definition was definitely one of the things came up, that there was a bit of a lack of clarity. And we've been heavily involved, Declan, in working with your team and kind of welcome that clustering policy, and great, Shane, to have the opportunity to kind of take that forward in Northern Ireland as well. There was a real need identified for the cluster policy too, so that's positive to see that coming, and really welcome that. And then back to that kind of cluster management and training and development, that was an area that was identified as a gap. So great to see if the policy starts to align and kind of include that in some of the future development. So I'll stop there, Eleanor.
Thanks, Alison. That's great. Again, you speak to, you know, the link between what's happening in terms of strategy and policy, and then actually, you know, joining up with that experience on the ground. And having worked, as I say, this week with some of the people delivering on the cluster management, I think, again, there's quite a bit of learning from the recent period around, as you mentioned it there, what it takes for a cluster organization set up to support these activities, for such an organization to become itself sustainable over time. And again, you know, sometimes it's not too bad to be behind the curve, because you see what is happening in other jurisdictions that are further along, developing their infrastructure to support clustering, to have organizations in place to support, you know, industry members who want to be and are committed and are contributing to cluster focused development. And internationally, we had a speaker this week with us from Austria. Last year, when we were providing different type of training, we had someone over from Spain, from Barcelona. And in those places where there is this bigger infrastructure over a longer period of time, I think by about year 3, 4, 5 beyond, you can almost see scope for sort of shared services across cluster type organizations to be developed, so that individual cluster managers aren't duplicating and are making better use of resources, and so on and so forth. But I guess that's in the detail. Let me just checking now on my times. We might go to some of the questions. I think we have some interesting questions and issues that are raised from the floor. There's an interesting question or issue raised, noting, and I just go through these as they came in. The Northern and Western region has only one high-performing cluster. How do we organise structures subnationally to accelerate a second high-performing cluster? I think that is an enormous question in terms of I guess we don't necessarily have clarity. It's a bit of a trial and error. There are some international best practices that can be followed. And I think the point that struck me, I think you raised it, or Shane raised it, in terms of when we have quite a lot of input and support for a clustering activity that hasn't put us yet on the map. I think that keeps us honest as well, in terms of appreciating that we are operating in very internationally competitive fields. Can I ask the panelists, would you have views on this? Declan, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and particularly on the Northwest, and I think that's been really interesting discussions. And I just come back to this point about the institutional actors, and I know you mentioned it in terms of Austria. And so when we looked at, we've seen it over all the decades, essentially at this stage, maybe some Porter's early work, there was that institutional strength, and it was partly due to industrial organization, where you had, for example, really strong chambers of commerce who had that capacity, that history of developmental focus in terms of around technology, around science, around management development, around skills, etc., and all of that. And then they morphed and all the various, but it was also a competitive rivalry as part of that as well. So they were all competing with each other and driving on. So and all of the adaptive learning and all of that. So we are coming to it a little bit late, and we've had really strong enterprise agencies who have led at sector level. And I think I suppose if we map it out over the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen this more bottom-up industrial organization. And certainly we are seeing from an institution perspective that it's really strengthening across trade associations, representative associations, etc., at local level, the various chambers in Ireland taking initiatives and actually coming in for funding, whether it's around green or around finance or around cyber, etc., and coming in with sustainable business plans and sort of saying, well, we can kickstart this and we can actually progress it. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of all of those new actors, I would say, on the pitch, and essentially why was a risk going the competitive call process, and reference some of those who are now cluster managers who are competing for funding but looking for funding on the basis of sustainable plans. But they also, in addition to coming to the state, is almost at the end of the process, because they actually have to generate the business rationale with their members and with industry. So it's business which is actually sort of waking, has to have this view. Well, I'm busy doing my own job, but actually, if I'm part of a cluster, or if I see a cluster developing in this area, we can actually capture the new innovations or the new opportunities which are there for internationalization or another thing, and for jobs growth, for efficiency, for productivity, etc. Getting new markets, getting part of a new value chain, which may be an opportunity. And I just call out those various actors. I see somebody has a comment there around there's additional the Enterprise Ireland technology gateways, and they're now actually managers and resources and liaison, etc. And that's really important as part of the infrastructure. So as part of that piece around accelerating the momentum, I do think knowing that who all the various actors are, but also in terms of at a regional level, the actors coming together and facilitating that. One in particular I mentioned, we've over the last number of years had the regional enterprise plans, and they've tried to bring not just a county perspective but a regional perspective to it. And when the question came up about the Northwest, when they were revising their regional enterprise plan about 2 years ago, put a very specific focus on clusters and on cluster development, and that was one of their top areas. And sort of saying, yeah, how do we move from just having one strong cluster to developing 2 or 3 others? And in September of this year, I'm aware that ATU have taken the initiative to be that activator, enabler, where they will engage with the industry and all of the elements of all of the participants in the innovation ecosystem. And indeed, Neil may well be seeding that in some way from his previous role with ATU and Sligo IT. So, but that's really important, that you actually have somebody who has credibility, who knows the region, knows the players, and can actually have those deep and meaningful engagement and sort of map out the potential in terms of what a cluster or what a coming together might be, and then also the connectivity in terms of into new areas. So I think in that area, for example, they're looking at something really exciting happening at European level around chips, semiconductors, microelectronics. There's a capacity and a capability in the Northwest, and there's a north-south dimension to that as well. So how do you capture that in terms of whether and what parts of the value chain are you going to act? Does the Northwest bring real value? Is it on design, or is it on the manufacture, or is it on further downstream in terms of the application, etc.? But that's a really important part of sort of saying, yeah, actually, Because we know the players, we have something, a niche here, which is where we can develop a real competitive advantage, but we need to actually work together. And that means, and maybe the Northwest then combines with, for example, the Southwest and Tyndall and Axero with the new analog, IPK, etc., and it gets a route into Europe, or it works with, for example, in the North in terms of the Seagate, etc. But that dimension, but it's having an actor with credibility who can map out that course and you've probably been doing this week, Eleanor, of course, with all the cluster managers. But at that nascent area, that's something where I think there's real potential. But it's how do those actors are they encouraged, and how do we support that? So we're very open to doing that. And as I said, the new fund has up to 2 million available for at a regional level, and it's ERDF supported as well. So we're very open to suggestions in that area. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Those are some of the issues that came up in our discussions, and that the importance of being able to map out value chain presence of our local actors. I think that's probably an underrated capacity, if I'm honest. And it speaks to the issues that Neil is presenting us with, really, in terms of being sure that we can stand over the evidence base, whether that's in quantitative terms or, you know, qualitative feedback from business on the ground. I think that is really hugely central. The whole notion of the clustering was always grounded in industry-driven requirements, not any of us proposing to know what business needs, and then having, I suppose, this different type of approach beyond, I guess, the lobbying type of approaches that we would be relatively familiar with, in terms of, you know, the need to collaborate in an honest and open way about what those really tough challenges and barriers to moving up value chains actually are, and which ones then businesses really want to engage collaboratively in. And again, we had some tough discussions, I can tell you, this week, last year, in terms of, if the companies don't see value in cluster organizations and what they're doing, well, I'm a public servant, you know, there are a better way that those resources could be applied, would be my view. So we need to try and make sure that, you know, there's ample support given to these organizations to offer services and support. But again, like any endeavor, no one owes any of us, I guess, a living. And I might bring in another question on that note. In what way can higher education institutions enable and support the creation of these clusters? To be fair, I think you've addressed that in some of your comments there, Declan, as well. Shane or Alison, in terms of the interactions at the HEIs?
Look, I don't really think you can have it without, you know, if it's absent, some sort of innovative capacity in the area, because it's innovation which will help keep the companies within the cluster at the forefront, at the frontier, and having that innovative capability within the area is absolutely crucial. You know, does it have to be absolutely, you know, they're linked in the area? You know, physical location and links these days are not necessarily one and the same, but having that source of innovative and invention linked and strongly linked to the clusters is absolutely crucial. Just on the previous question, I just want to sort of chip in one thought which I was going to mention. So the area of sort of net zero in the environment was rated down as, you know, one of the sort of cluster areas at a low level of development, and you know, given the net zero agenda is probably, you know, there for a number of years been an evolutionary phase. What looks on the cusp of going into a revolutionary phase, that revolutionary phase could really drive change in demand. And you know, if in 7 or 8 years, you know, that cluster still looks like it does today, we'll all be very disappointed. And so there's a lot of potential there. And if you're up in the northwest of Northern Ireland or Ireland, you could be looking at your, there some of the, their facilities and potential that you have, and you might be wondering whether this is an area which, okay, on Nile scale, there might be what look like a more modest opportunity. Might actually be one of the biggest opportunities to to put that area on the map.
Eleanor, I'll come in if you want with a couple of thoughts on maybe both those questions. I think to scale the clusters and develop the clusters, support that is flexible is really important, and recognizing that all clusters are different and maybe not one support is needed by all clusters. And I suppose we try that and to deliver that through our synergy program in terms of funding a really different range of supports that are driven by the needs of the clusters and their members, rather than them kind of trying to dictate what the support should be. And in terms of kind of the higher academic institutes, absolutely essential to clusters. And like Declan mentioned, Horizon Europe is particularly important now that the UK is back there, because that really impactful global research will help to drive innovation going forward. And it's really important that we see more north-south involvement in those research projects in Horizon Europe. But kind of right across the gambit, even in terms of academic involvement within the clusters. To give examples, like the FinTech corridor that we are supporting, there are 5 universities that come together to develop courses and training and information and advice in FinTech skills, both needed today, but the future FinTech skills. So they're able to upskill people, able to attract individuals from across the island who aren't necessarily involved in the FinTech industry at the moment to be the future of that cluster. There are academic institutes involved in delivering apprenticeships, again, aligned to FinTech corridor and FinTech skills. So I think from that driving it as kind of cluster management, but being right in kind of the center of that cluster development in terms of skills, innovation, and just being the local players. And most of those academic institutes operate right across the island. So really important in all of that cluster development.
And I guess it points to the need for institutionally supporting greater collaboration across those institutions as well. It's not always clear how well connected different institutes are, and I think we could work more smartly in that, coming from the HEI perspective in particular. And I think that there's a question here that, for me anyway, reads quite similar, even though it's focusing on how do we harness schemes, different schemes, regional technological cluster and supports. How do we harness these to build on what's there already? And I think there's a bit of homework that we could do jointly in terms of, linking up those different pieces. I think we have interesting islands of activity in this space that in themselves would benefit from greater institutional support and collaboration. We have a question from someone after my own heart. I promise I haven't invented this question, but it could be me. Thomas Bell focuses in on data and identifies that it's a feature of official statistics, the effects of certain firms, larger and smaller, are suppressed, and so on and so forth. So the question is how we might improve data linkages and general understanding of the supply chains of larger firms, how these can be developed in terms of the policy that we're talking about. And I guess really, when you're doing this kind of work, Neil, you've faced this. You have to use the data that are available to the best of your ability. Perhaps you have a comment on that, Neil?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think really when you look at the data we have, there is substantial data, but it's in many cases needs a lot more in-depth analysis. We're just actually, I think a week ago, we've just seen the census of population new data on employment, which I think will be very useful in the Republic, and similar data from the recent census in Northern Ireland also. I think I should also mention there's other ways also of getting data other than the statistical sources, as it were. John Hobbs, for example's methodology in terms of looking at families of clusters and strong and weak linkages across various aspects, I think is really interesting. I know it's been used in cybersecurity and a number of other areas, but I think that's a really interesting piece of work. Christopher Nagrit in Nuth, really strong focus, and again his and colleagues' NESC report in May of this year, I thought was really significant, using in fact agency data, Declan, which I think the department made available, which is really, really productive. So I think there's certainly a lot of extra analysis and bringing it together. In a sense, that's what the comment about an observatory was about, really, because it's about, we can do deep dives into the data, but we also need to bring it together. We need to join up the dots. And as one commentator, one report was talking about more joined upness, I think, which is a great phrase, which I've robbed. And I think that's a important part of the data. Absolutely, could be. We need to intelligent use of data. Maybe if I could put it like that.
There's something interesting which we got a demonstration of a few months ago from DCIT, I think the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology in London, that they've worked with Data City on mapping innovative clusters down at quite detailed levels, and they use it. It's a combination of web scraping, machine learning, along with company information, to sort of gauge whether companies are engaged in innovative type activities, and then using sort of data from Companies House and so forth around employment and location. And yes, there's always a bit of apportionment and all of that and some of that, and then using various definitions for the spatial aspect. So really interesting stuff. I don't know if it's fully been published or the interactive tool broken cover yet, but we know the work has been done. Say we got a demo of it, and it looked like a step forward in terms of they're adding that sort of, we're not just interested in the sector, but we're also interested in the sector, the innovative element of it, and that helped give a real pointer to that. So that's something which, if it hasn't broken cover, probably is eagerly awaited.
Super. That sounds really, really interesting. And I think the promise of those types of projects is in terms of the immediacy of the data, because that's another kind of pain point for any of us doing this kind of work. The timeliness of data is usually painfully slow. But when you're talking web scraping and all this, you're talking about, much more immediate types of data. So that sounds really interesting. You also bring us back into the innovation space, which kind of links up. Maybe I'm pushing the connection here now, but we've another question about clustering, building on strengths and focusing on small geographic areas. Should we be growing clusters from center of excellence rather than multiple gateways? And I think there will be different perspectives on that. But if clustering is about answering the innovation piece, then I guess through framing innovation, that should direct our attention to where that's happening and how it can be best supported. Or if we see clustering in other activities around, as Declan mentioned, the fat tail of low performing performers in some sectors, that probably is helpful to think more smaller geographies as well as larger geographies. So I really think the nature of the problem that we want to address through our different clustering practices will help us answer those types of issues. We have a number of other questions now. I'm not sure we'll get through them all. Let's see. We have RTCF and EI. We have new clusters. They have lots of members, scaling rapidly. They have steering groups. Yes, we've been working with a lot of these people. Yes, a lot of them are targeting EU projects as a means, again, of creating an interest. I think, why should firms get engaged in these projects? To access international partners, international knowledge, and grow their networks in that way. Is it entrepreneurs that should determine strategy for the cluster? I guess entrepreneurial strategy should feed into any of these activities. And I'm happy now for anyone to come in on any of these things. We really have just minutes left. How would you consider a good measure of a cluster? I think there are indications in what Neil has reported to us here. And John Hobbs, who I was working with this week, are there enough concentrations in any of the regions to develop clusters of scale? I think, yeah, we can discuss all of those. There is, you know, what the evidence to date shows, and Neil has taken us through this, that to develop on the areas of strength already identified, we know what we're good at, we can identify pockets of success and decide which ones then to follow through, because we can't do everything. Unfortunately, folks, I think we have to wrap up our session right here, right now. Thank you very much for your input across the board from the audience, I guess, as much as from the panelists yourselves. Nice insights, good interaction in terms of this space. I think it's one that we're all committed to. I think by way of my own interjections, my own insights are provided there. I won't rehash them, apart from, I guess, my final comment being, you know, once we're clear about the questions we're trying to answer through clustering, I think that's helpful for us then to decide which ones have the greatest impact, where we might be, you know, looking for new ways of implementing for that impact. So thanks very much to everyone on the panel. And I think I should hand over to my boss.
Yeah, well, I'm not.
If that's okay,
for that,
Anthony.
Eleanor.
You're my
Absolutely.
boss for today. So thank you very much, Anthony. I'll hand back to you.
Not at all. Look, I'd like to thank, first of all, Neil for the report. I mean, absolutely fantastic report. And thanks so much to our panelists, to Declan, to Shane, to Alison, and for the brilliant sharing of all of this by Eleanor. Really grateful. But most of all, grateful to and I have to say, you're all high level attendees, because we checked. So delighted that you were all with us, and thank you so much for all the questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through absolutely all of them, but we tried to get through most of them. And this conversation will continue. Obviously, the two government departments, North and South, and Intertrade Ireland, there is one of our Strand 2 implementation bodies, will continue its great work in this area. Eleanor as well, and obviously Neil, now Senior Research Associate with the CCBS, an honorary title, I must underline. So thank you so much to everybody, and have a great rest of a Friday, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining in.